Hello, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for joining us once again, our weekly media briefing with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgilla, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Dr. James Bridgers, Director of the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Earl Stoddard, who is Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Program Administrator, Public Health, Emergency Preparedness and Response for the Department of Health and Human Services. And we have a special guest today, Ms. Mara Parker, who is the Climate Adaptation Program Manager. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, members of the media. Remember to raise your hand for the Q&A portions of this presentation. And with that, I toss it to you, Mr. County Executive. Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. And good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us at our earlier than usual time today. Over the past week, we had to deal with extreme heat as well as severe thunderstorms that impacted many families and neighborhoods across the county. And the picture on your screen is from Glen Echo Park, where trees were uprooted and structures such as this pavilion were damaged. I've heard a lot of stories from residents about damage on their streets and the power lines and poles. It was a very different storm event. Fortunately, not the typical storm event. There were some of the most widespread and devastating storms that we've had in our county in a while. And we had several thousand residents who were without power for 2 days. Montgomery County employees worked hard to assist people recovering from this weekend's storm. We provided regular alerts and updates on social media and other platforms and steered them towards help as best we could. And we assisted those in need to find shelter, rescued boaters during the thunderstorms. We moved trees and debris from streets and sidewalks and distributed water on ride-on buses and directed traffic when the lights were out. The 911 call center reported 1,300 calls in the first 2 hours of the storm on Friday, and by Monday, the county's Department of Transportation had removed more than 160 fallen trees. So we were busy. Obviously, we're not staffed for removing 160 trees pretty quickly. It takes time to work through that pile. And I want to thank our staff for being out there and working long and hard to get those trees removed. I want to thank our county's first responders, as well as those working for the state, Pepco, Washington Gas, and WSSC for their response to these storms. Pepco reported more than 1,300 line workers, mutual assistant crews, contractor support personnel, and customer representatives were used around the clock following the storm. I also want to thank the Medical Reserve Corps and the Red Cross of the National Capital and Greater Chesapeake area in helping us to set up temporary shelters for victims of the storm. All these efforts made a difficult weekend much better for so many people. And it probably was mitigated a little bit by the better weather that came at the end of it. It was nice to get out of the storms and at least get some relief from the heat and the rain. As you've heard me say before, more frequent, severe, and extreme weather is apparently going to be our new normal. And we're working to slow the rate of climate change. And we know we have to work on resiliency and be better prepared to withstand its impacts. That's why we've developed a new position in Montgomery County, the Climate Adaptation Program Manager. And today's guest is Mara Parker. She's the first Climate Adaptation Program Manager, and she works in the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. And she manages the development of climate adaptation and resiliency programs to help mitigate the impacts of climate changes and also to promote emergency preparedness in the face of climate-related hazards, with a particular emphasis on communities at high risk. Mara works in partnership with community partners to develop resiliency hubs, address urban heat island effects and flooding, and conduct climate-related community outreach and position the county and community to maximize funding opportunities related to climate change. And additionally, Mara is a member of the county's climate leadership team, and she works with her colleagues to support implementation of the county's climate action plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Mara to talk more about her position and the intersection of combating climate change and the resiliency efforts. So Mara, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, County Executive. Welcome. I'm delighted to be here and very honored to be in this new position that evolved out of the county's climate action plan, which was spearheaded by the County Executive, many supported by members of our community and by the council, and appreciate the opportunity to work at this intersection of emergency management and climate change. I think that, as the county executive has pointed out, it's very important that we do all we can to reduce our GHG emissions, but at the same time, we need to acknowledge that the changing climate is already here and that those impacts are not felt equitably around the county. And as a government institution, we have an obligation to try to do all we can to mitigate that, to help people prepare for it. So it's a very exciting time to be working with all of our community partners, as well as partners across county government, including the Department of General Services, to build out different projects like the resilience hubs that were referred to. For those who are wondering what a resilience hub is, this is infrastructure that basically brings together, it combines solar and energy storage on a microgrid. So at a community-based location, that can be a county-owned facility like a recreation center, which was just installed, the first one at Scotland Recreation Center. It could also be something that is a naturally occurring community space. It could be, for example, a faith-based or nonprofit institution that provides, it already has deep connections to the community through food distributions or healthcare providing. And so you want to help them have more resilient infrastructure by installing solar and energy storage microgrids so they can keep the lights on and heating and cooling capability when the power goes off. You have a place that the community already feels comfortable going to during times of crisis. And so they have an opportunity to go there. And if we had, as we did last week, a heat emergency with extremely high and dangerous temperatures from urban heat island effect, they would have a safe place to go where they could cool off, charge their devices. If they have medication that needs to be refrigerated, a resilience hub provides a place where that could be stored safely until power is restored. So it's really a place that is going to bring everyone together in a safe space. And we're going to be working with community partners as well as folks here in the county to look at maximizing opportunities also to receive federal and state funding to help with these types of adaptation and resiliency efforts. A few of the other projects that we're working on within emergency management and with the climate leadership team include a recent heat island effect study that was done in partnership with NOAA through a grant last August, where we went around with citizen scientists to help us map where the urban heat island effect was the strongest and was having the most impact, parts of the county that were on average 10 degrees higher than other areas. We're also now working with a grant from the American Geophysics Union and the Thriving Earth Exchange Project. We have the assistance of some professors who are volunteering their time to help us utilize GIS to map tree canopy and pair that up with that heat island effect so that we can help prioritize where we put some of the county's resources when it comes to tree plantings and green infrastructure. And that kind of infrastructure has co-benefits. Not only does it help us if we have shade from trees, but that infrastructure can help us with one of our other major impacts, which is flooding and flash flooding. When you have green infrastructure and nature-based solutions in place, it doesn't just provide a beautiful place for people to be, but it also helps absorb some of that stormwater runoff. So we have a number of really exciting projects we're working on, and I'm looking forward to maximizing the relationships that we have and building new ones within the community to also hear about what they need and how we can work together to help them achieve their goals.
Thank you very much, Ms. Parker. Members of the media, we're going to open it up right now for Q&As regarding this topic. Please raise your hand. We'll give you a second or two. Kate Ryan, good afternoon, WTOP. You need to mute, Kate. Unmute. There you are. We don't hear you.
Yeah, try now.
Yes, much better. Yes.
Very much. All right, so I wanted to ask about grid resiliency. I know over the years, and I think the county executive will recall this, the blue sky outages were very frequent in the county. The PSC got involved. There was legislation, and I'm going back maybe 10 years now. Are we doing better? And I put that question to Ms. Parker and also to the county executive, and perhaps Dr. Stoddard, you've worked on these things as well. What's your thought on that? Are we getting better at recovering from increasingly violent storms?
I'm happy to. So I was actually heavily involved in writing the report that was drafted back in the Leggett administration about the blue sky outage issue. We had storms back in, this is probably 2010, I believe, July and August, that knocked out hundreds of thousands of residents at the time. And it was compounding on the back of the blue sky outages we're experiencing. And so a report was produced that looked at all sorts of issues, particularly as a focus on Pepco, because obviously they were the largest provider and still are for most of the service in Montgomery County. And yes, the performance is better. I mean, I think we illustrated in that report, the work group really effectively found that the tree vegetation management that Pepco had been doing in the years preceding those storms and the years preceding those blue sky outages was markedly reduced. And obviously they've invested substantially more in that now as a prospective measure. I was also involved in the RM43, which is the rulemaking you alluded to that the PSC did, and providing feedback on that whole process. And, we're very pleased with that outcome in terms of just the change we've seen in the behavior of the utilities. They continue to collaborate with the county on prioritizing key facilities that are for restoration. They also collaborate with our Department of Transportation around clearance of wires and trees. And so it is a much better partnership than it was when I started with the county back in 2009. And we're definitely pleased with some of the progress, but it's one of those things where what happened back in 2009 is that it was deemed to be more cost effective by them to reduce some of the things that they were doing. And we have to constantly be trusting but verifying with the utilities to make sure that the Public Service Commission is applying the appropriate amount of oversight to ensure that we don't fall back into those same trends.
And Ms. Parker or county executive?
I feel the same way. I mean, because the blue sky outages were, both frequent and extraordinarily irritating to people. We haven't had those kind of things recently. And, Pepco was forced, is probably the best word to say it, best way to say it, to actually get more serious about their management practices and building lines that are more resilient. And you could see them. You see now lines that have a steel cord. I guess it's steel. That's part of the line that supports it and gives it, more ability to survive having a branch land on it. So we've definitely seen an improvement. And I think, I'm sure for residents, 2 days of outage was not an easy thing to endure, but nobody is staffed for, a once a year or, twice a year event of this magnitude. And, they did, I think, a pretty good job of mobilizing and getting as many people restoration of service as quickly as possible. I think we all wish it could be faster, but it does seem like they put a lot of resources in the field to deal with it.
Yeah, I would just agree with what Dr. Stoddard and the county executive have said. I recall living in the Long Branch neighborhood and being without power for 6 days after Hurricane Isabel. And there's been a significant improvement in all of that tree trimming and those practices. But I do think it's really important for us to keep those types of things in mind as we move forward, as we identify communities where there's a higher level of social vulnerability. We have to be prepared to harden the infrastructure in those specific communities and really prioritize things that will help them. Because as much as we may prepare for these incidents, we will occasionally have a derecho event or an event like we just saw in Vermont, where just an incredible amount of precipitation falls in a way that's going to be almost impossible to completely prepare for. So we have to be able to help pivot with our most vulnerable communities and help them adapt when those things happen, which unfortunately they're happening with increasing frequency.
Got it. And you mentioned vulnerable communities. I know, for example, during the heat emergency, there was a reminder that apartment dwellers must have adequate air conditioning. I think the landlords are held to it cannot be 80 degrees or above. How did we do in the latest, blazing heat? Did you get reports or complaints about violations of that rule?
I think we had to go back and check to see what violations the HCA received. We could certainly follow up on that. I did not hear any reports that came up to the county executive's office, but that doesn't mean that there weren't some, and we can follow up on that.
Yeah, I'm not specifically aware. I think, as was mentioned earlier by the county executive, we did have some facilities, including a large apartment building in the North Bethesda area that lost power because of a fallen tree, which, of course, when you compound that with the heat and sometimes having vulnerable folks who live there and are not easily able to evacuate from a large structure, fortunately, as the executive pointed out, we had a really robust response from county agencies and many of our volunteers to help folks get some sheltering and cool off until their power could be restored.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Members of the media, any other questions related to this topic, please raise your hand. No more questions on this? Thank you very much, Mara Parker. Congratulations on your new post as a Climate Adaptation Program Manager for the county. You can drop off or you can stay here, Mr. County Executive. Other topics.
Okay, so last night our community celebrated the 40th anniversary of National Night Out. This is an annual event, and there was an opportunity for neighborhoods to get to know the police officers, firefighters, and others of our first responders that serve the community. And there were events all over the county. I was able to visit activities at White Oak, Olney, Mount Calvary, went over in Lincoln Park, Aspen Hill, and at Flora Singer Elementary School, which when I went there in the early 60s was my elementary school. And then back then it was McKinney Hills Elementary School. So it was great to get around, to see a lot of people, get to talk to a lot of people. And it was great to see so many people out. Last year we did this, and there were people out. The crowds were smaller, and it was just notable how many people had showed up and come out last night. So it was great to be out there, and really good to get a chance to talk to people. Also get the chance to talk to some of our frontline workers in the police department and fire department. We saw recruiters out there for our call centers. Any of you interested in a job that has pretty decent pay and ends up with a really decent pay, you should check out the county call center positions, and they're recruiting for the police department as well. And we've done a lot of stuff to increase wages and also provide incentives for signing up. So if anybody's listening in or going to get this message, we want them to know that we're out there. Not only were we celebrating Night Out, but we're also reminding people we have job openings and we'd love to have you come fill them. And it's a good reminder of that, important way of keeping our community safe is having our neighbors engaging with each other and having positive interactions with our first responders. And, the usual thing that's always fun is you see a fire truck at one of these events and there are kids all over it. And for whatever reasons, fire trucks seem to have magical attraction to children. So it was really cool to see the kids climbing into the fire truck at Olney. And I just thought there was a really nice night all told. So I was happy I went out and hope everybody had a good time. This week also, Visit Montgomery hosted the MidAtlantic Tourism Public Relations Alliance. It's a regional tourism partners encompassing Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., and West Virginia. And there were 60 tourism representatives and about 50 journalists from these organizations who've been here. They participated in a variety of events and activities and familiarization tours throughout the county. This is the largest media event Visit Montgomery has hosted. And on Monday, I attended a welcome dinner for this group out at the Comus Inn in Dickerson that really showed off how Montgomery County is changing as a tourist destination for food and wine connoisseurs. For years, I've known about the Comus Inn, went to it years ago, It's a nice restaurant, but it was, it was more fun. In the old days, a little bit more formal, a little more reserved. And they have really done a lovely renovation out there. And they brought in this world-renowned chef, Sammy DeMarco, who's originally from New York City. And his career has taken him all over the world to places like Australia, Canada, Dubai, Thailand, with restaurants in the Bellagio in Las Vegas and the Kimpton Hotel in Amsterdam. So he was kind of on display that night as well. And it was pretty good. Montgomery took this group also to our new Crossvines facility in Poolesville, as well as hosting them for meetings in a trade show at Pike and Rose in North Bethesda. So the county has a great story to tell, and it's a story that's getting better. Now that the travel industry has rebounded back to pre-pandemic levels, we're doing a better job of telling our story. Montgomery County is already one of the most visited counties in Maryland, with 6.8 million day and night visitors, and generates about $1.4 billion in local economy, 20,000 jobs, 4.4% of our workforce is tied to this industry. So this is not a small factor in the county's well-being. And as I expressed in our tourism industry visitors this week, we know hospitality well because it's one of our top industries in the county. This county is actually home to Marriott, Choice Hotels, Sodexo, and Host Hotels. And so we're the center of a lot of this activity, and it's good to see everybody coming here and wanting to learn more about Montgomery County. But I think one of the things that makes us unique is the variety of cultures from every part of the world here, and one of the most diverse and inclusionary jurisdictions in the nation, if not the world. And we're diverse in a lot of ways, from things like urban, suburban, to rural, to the numerous ethnicities and races and religions that call Montgomery County home, and to a plethora of restaurants that reflect the diversity of the people who live here. So, and this matters, I think, a lot to people coming from other countries. You can wind up in Montgomery County and you can much be assured that you're going to find food somewhere here that's familiar to you. And you can't always do that. So it's probably one of the things that makes us more attractive. And I appreciate the MidAtlantic Tourism Public Relations Alliance for coming to Montgomery County. And I want to thank Kelly Groff, President and CEO of Visit Montgomery, and her team for organizing this event proactively and working with those who are going to increase awareness and draw visitors and create more revenues for our business and our economy. One of the really big things that we're emphasizing, we're going to keep emphasizing, is the Crossvines facility, which is not only a place to have events, but it's also a place where we are actually providing crush services and barrels and stainless steel storage for winemakers in the county, and encouraging more and more of our farmers to get into the wine side of agriculture. And for all the right reasons, we believe we can have an industry comparable to what developed over almost a decade in Northern Virginia. We have the right soil, we have the right climate, and we've got people now starting to grow grapes. So we're hoping that the day comes, not too distant future, where we've got a wine trail and we've got an industry that rivals the kind of industry you find in other places. And so I'm looking forward to the continued growth there. Montgomery County continues to have 3 cities named as the most diverse cities in America. And ranking 1, 2, and 3 were Gaithersburg, Germantown, and Silver Spring. And so, we're recognized for our diversity. This week, the financial website Wallet Hub released a report that had those 3 cities in the top 3. And additionally, Rockville came in number 13. And when I was growing up in Montgomery County, it was a county that was 95% white, which you would pretty much expect. Our community has benefited from how diverse it's become because of our willingness to welcome these different people into this county. I've heard routinely from those in the immigrant communities that they sought to live here and raise families here because they felt more welcome here in our communities and in our schools. And that perception of the county's openness is not lost on foreign companies looking to establish a presence here. When I traveled to Taipei in Taiwan, earlier this year, and we're meeting businesses. There were people there who knew about Montgomery County, who'd opened businesses here, who'd worked at FDA or NIH, who graduated from the University of Maryland, Johns Hopkins. And so being known and having a good reputation for being inclusive is a big deal for people who are looking to open up a beachhead in the United States, particularly drug companies that want to be close to NIH and to the FDA. Being a place that people can say, I can be there and I can see myself fitting in there is a really positive thing for us. Other good news, this, as I mentioned last week, I want to focus more on our efforts to combat climate change this week. I wanted to update you on efforts to expand our adoption of adoption of electric vehicles or EVs. As an EV owner myself, I'm proud of the way the county and state have committed to getting more electric vehicles on the road. Even though Montgomery County represents a sixth of the state populations, we have a third of all registered plug-in vehicles in the state of Maryland. One thing we've done in Montgomery County is develop the EV purchasing co-op. It brings together participating dealerships, and they've pledged to honor incentives geared toward Montgomery County residents. Savings could be applied to purchases or leases of new or pre-owned electric vehicles. There are two statewide programs offering incentives for electric vehicles. One is an excise tax credit for up to $3,000 towards a plug-in vehicle, and another EV rebate program which offers 40% off the cost of charging equipment and installation. And what makes this even more appealing is the county's now approved, if you live in a regular residential neighborhood, and let's say you've got a sidewalk but you don't have a driveway, we're now allowing installation of electric chargers on that piece of your property between the sidewalk and the street. So we're doing what we can do to facilitate people's willingness and ability to adopt EVs and make it easier to charge your EV in front of your house. New state programs began last month, and there's some examples of the incentives. The excise tax credit for plug-ins is $3,000 for vehicles under $50,000. There's a new state tax credit. When combined with the existing federal tax credit, you can get up to $10,500 for qualifying vehicles, and that's significant. There's also new funding for the state's electric supply equipment and EV charger rebate program, which helps pay for the new charging equipment in your home. And if you're an individual, you can get up to $700 as a credit. And if you're a commercial property owner, you can get rebates up to $4,000. So this is significant. EVs are in stock locally, and dealerships are working to make it easier than ever to find a deal on them. Each month, Department of Environmental Protection EV teams updates our website with incentives and special offers from automobile retailers in the county. As you can see in this graphic from our DEP website, we currently have 5 dealers in the county with specific EV deals. We're pushing more consumers to switch to EVs to reduce our carbon footprint and to meet our climate action goals. And it's also a good car for owners, saving them money in the long run. And this chart gives you an idea of some of the savings. And since I drive an EV, I can personally attest to the benefits, financial benefits of this side of the equation. It made it possible for me to switch from a decent car with that was gas driven, but had pretty decent mileage. Even with the decent mileage, it was cheaper to keep my EV fueled, and the combined savings, along with a lease that was pretty close to the lease I already had, made it a pretty easy no-brainer switch to get myself into an EV. An EV owner can save up to $10,000 over 5 years on fuel and maintenance as compared to those gas cars. It's nice not to have a transmission to repair or gears to repair or carburetors to worry about or finicky electronics and computers under your hood that make constant alterations to the fuel air mixture, which is all great, and it's good to have the technology to do that, but an EV is just simply simpler. Also, we continue to push grant applications to expand EV charging stations and infrastructure at our county facilities as well as private properties. And as we're practicing what we preach and continuing to switch our county fleet of cars and buses over to electric. Earlier this year, Governor Moore announced Maryland's adoption of the Advanced Clean Energy Cars 2 rule to combat the effects of climate change. This new regulation requires manufacturers to continuously increase the share of electric vehicles sold in Maryland until they reach 100% of passenger cars and light truck sales by the model year 2035. This is an ambitious goal, and I support this goal, and I really thank the governor for his leadership. And so we're going to continue to do our part in Montgomery County when it comes to promoting the switch to EVs. So finally, I'm going to turn this over to Sean O'Donnell for a COVID update. Obviously, we're still in a low scenario, but there is an uptick in cases, and Mr. O'Donnell can tell you all about that. So I'll turn it over to Sean now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Okay, so to begin with, when we look at our surveillance data, we're seeing that globally, what has been green on this map showing improvements in case rates has now moved towards a more neutral basis, showing that that instead of improving, it's either holding steady or potentially getting a little bit worse. We have seen that in our county. Our case rate has gone up to 16 cases per 100,000. Again, this is still in the low category, but we are reporting an increase in case rates by PCR testing. It's obviously going to be quite a bit higher given the predominant use of rapid testing. I want to focus, these hospitalization rates are about a week old, but we've seen some movement during the last week. Again, across the state, it's not just Montgomery County, across the state, you can see over the last week, the average percent positivity has slowly been climbing, with a higher rate of people doing those tests coming back positive. It's showing a little more disease transmissions. Looking at our hospitalization rates, we reported usually we can look at this each day, but we usually report out to all of you the finalized rates as of Monday afternoon. Last week it was we had 8 acute care, 1 ICU. This week, we have roughly double the number of acute care patients and no ICU patients as of Monday. Again, these numbers tend to fluctuate a little bit day to day, but we are seeing increased numbers of people at our hospitals with a COVID diagnosis. It does not mean they're all there just because of COVID, but it is showing higher transmissions of COVID. And you can see on our right how those numbers are a bit higher than they have been over the last few months. Looking statewide, you can also see across the state that over the last week, these are daily numbers over the last week, there's been a slow but steady increase in the number of patients with a COVID diagnosis. Most of the increase is driven at the acute care bed level with relatively similar ICU numbers, although those tend to trail acute bed patients. What we are looking, when we look at our emergency departments, we have not seen an increased number of patients visiting our emergency departments at the same time. And then looking at all hospital activity for respiratory illness, again, this gives us an idea of whether we're seeing increased usage by different age groups. The one group that we see with a higher level is our 65 plus population. Again, these are the most susceptible to more serious illness related to COVID or other respiratory disease. Reporting our death numbers, again, so far through the July data, there can still be some July data coming in. We've not passed the 10 deaths in our county threshold where the state will release the actual number. So currently it is below 10 for July. And again, we want to remind folks, we are still doing COVID vaccinations at our Dennis Avenue site. They can still be widely found around the county at pharmacies and at other locations, and still at no cost at most places. Please inquire before you go, just to ensure whether they're covered by your specific insurance, or if they waive the cost if you're uninsured. Again, we're tracking on all of these, and we are looking forward to an updated booster shot in the fall, which the county will be helping to distribute out to our uninsured populations, as well as we understand that the federal government is contracting with the pharmacy chains to make sure that these are available at no cost to all individuals, whether it's your insurance covering it or the federal partnership with pharmacies covering if you don't have insurance. We also want to remind folks that those who are 60 and above will have there will be access to a new vaccine for RSV, which is another respiratory virus, which can it affects a lot of young people, but with very minor illness, generally speaking. For those who are 60 and older, they're now going to be recommended to take an RSV vaccination, which will be available. So we encourage our residents who are 60 and above to talk to their healthcare provider and potentially schedule an appointment once those become available. They're not yet available, but sometime likely in September, they'll become available. And so those are the updates we have right now on COVID. I'd like to see if Dr. Bridgers or Dr. Stoddard have any additional comments to add.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. No additional comments for me this afternoon.
Me either.
Thank you, gentlemen. Members of the media, Q&A portion of this presentation. There's Kate Ryan again. Good afternoon, Kate. Remember to raise your hand. Go ahead, Kate.
Thank you very much. A quick question on the COVID vaccines that will be available in the fall. Is this a new permutation? You know how we've seen the changing, for lack of a better word, formulas of these. Is this going to be a new iteration of the vaccines we've seen before?
That's correct, Kate. This will be an updated formulation. The FDA has approved and recommended that a new monovalent vaccine will be available. They're removing that original strain that was in the formulary that targeted the original strain, and so the new one will be targeting the XBB strain and should hopefully be effective in preventing a lot of the variants that are related to that, which is virtually all the variants we've seen this calendar year.
Got it. And the COVID vaccines, I know that we're seeing a lot of advisories on, hey, and I know kids hate to hear this, back to school vaccinations are on the calendar. Will this be something that is recommended for back to school populations?
So we are waiting on the specific guidance from CDC as to the recommendations. I'm anticipating that probably all populations will be recommended to get a booster. I'm anticipating that. I don't know that it will be available in time for the back to school vaccinations. We're starting in HHS, we're starting our back to school vaccination campaigns. We started it this month. So we'll be doing them throughout August. And our hope is to help anyone who has not gone to their pediatrician to get their required vaccinations. The county will help offer those. We're also going to be offering COVID vaccinations of the current formulary at those back to school clinics, but we don't anticipate that the updated formulary will be available until likely mid to late September.
And just a quick follow-up, RSV vaccines for little kids. Again, is that part of the requirement for back to school at this point?
So that's a very good question. The RSV vaccine that's been recommended and approved through the FDA and CDC is only for those who are 60 and above. There is a new treatment for pediatrics in RSV. It's a monoclonal antibody, so it's also a shot like a vaccine. However, this is usually being recommended by pediatricians for specific patients who are at a much higher risk. The majority of young children get RSV by the time they're 2, and the vast majority have just a mild cold. However, there are some patients, particularly if they've had a premature birth with their child, that they should talk to their pediatricians because they may be at increased risk for RSV, and that pediatrician would recommend the monoclonal antibody shot.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Members of the media, any other questions? Please raise your hand. More questions today? Going once? Twice? I guess we're done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Oh, David Kaplan.
Sorry, is this okay for off topic for Mr. Elrich? I didn't want to miss the opportunity.
Depends how far off topic you get.
Yes,
sorry?
all topics.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just didn't know, Mr. Elrich, if you had been briefed on the wrong way crash and if you had any updates on the
No,
fatality that happened.
I was not briefed on the wrong way crash. I've been in meetings all morning, so.
Okay, got it. No worries. Just wanted to
Okay.
check.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I will now go find out.
All right, appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other questions before we go? All right, I guess we're done for today. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.